Welcome. This is TrineDay's Roundtable number 6, Resurrect JFK in the USA, part of the series Exposing the Failure of Empire and Reclaiming the Narrative Creation Process. This features not only publisher Kris Millegan, but also husband and wife co-authors, Paul Fitzgerald and Elizabeth Gould, and Carol Brouillet, organizer, activist, and founder of the Northern California 9/11 Truth Alliance. And I am Bruce de Torres, and I moderate these roundtables. And these were inspired by the valediction, Paul and Liz's 2-book memoir about their journalism in Afghanistan behind Soviet lines in 1981, and their 4-decade odyssey to discover how America ended up in its second Vietnam quagmire in Afghanistan, the graveyard of empires. This is going to last 90 minutes. And in the first hour or so, our panelists will present what they want us to know, and then we'll open it up for questions and comments. In ads for this roundtable, bless you, we said that the American dream thrived during the presidency of John F. Kennedy, and we can resurrect the USA by resurrecting his ideals. His ideals, I believe, were the ideals of the founding fathers. And I believe that America was the high point of human history, because the founding documents codified the idea of inalienable rights and the idea of the consent of the governed. And those ideas unleashed human energies in unprecedented ways. I further believe that John F. Kennedy's presidency was the high point of American history, because he tried to protect us from forces that wanted to undermine and circumvent the Constitution, all the while knowing that those forces kill to win. The Constitution was replaced by a state of emergency after 9/11, and our rights have been very much ignored and trampled ever since. To resurrect the USA, we must end that state of emergency and live once again under the Constitution. To make that happen, we must spread the word and get more people involved in that effort. And now, Kris Millegan.
Thank you, Bruce, very much. And thank you all for appearing here. Now, JFK was he knew about war. He fought in war. And so it was just, so devastating. I mean, as a child, to have the hope that he was presenting to us all to be snuffed out. And so, it was very, very traumatic. And so, I just went on with my life, but my father told me some stuff I didn't understand. And because of that, I'm what I'm calling playing the long game, because Kennedy wasn't killed by Lee Harvey Oswald. He was killed by a conspiracy of people that wanted to affect our world. And it's my strong belief that it is a long-range plan that people out of the shadows, which I call the Secret Society Network, have been doing. Now, when TrineDay was first going, we had an editor and a partner. He's since passed, and he had a doctorate in English. And I learned a lot from him and miss him daily. One day he told me to watch out for editors, because part of their job is to stroke both the author and the publisher. And for me to be careful, because some editors just floated along, not really doing much. Well, I was quite happy some months ago when I was introduced through one of TrineDay's authors to a very competent and excellent editor. He lived overseas, but with the technology today, that seemed like, it wouldn't be a problem. I gave him a historical novel. He did a great job. He fact-checked and helped the book flow better. He worked on another one, and then I gave him the valediction. Well, he worked on it very, very well. But soon he was arrested and thrown in jail for 3 days. Okay, for just doing research on Afghanistan and terrorism. Okay, and so one thing that brings to me is how important our country is, and our ability to do work here and, look at everything here without, getting thrown in jail. Lord have mercy. So, America, the United States of America has been the focus of a long-standing effort by forces that wish to end our experiment of citizen-run government. Autocratic regimes are more desired by the folks in the shadows. They're easier to control. Now, I had a talk recently with a TrineDay author, and I was very sad to hear him spouting radical talking points that are being used to create division and disunion. Yes, we have corruption, and our government needs help finding its way. And even good positions can be manipulated. I'm reminded of in the late 60s and 70s when many of us, including myself, were protesting the Vietnam War. And many of us to this day feel that our actions led to the end of the Vietnam War. But then I have to remember that I had my dad and a professor from Vanderbilt telling me in 1969 that the powers that be were playing out a loose scenario in Vietnam. Vietnam was a planned debacle, okay? And so what happened during that? The powers that be used our protest to get rid of the draft. Now, people might think that's a good thing. Well, in the long run, in the long game, it's really not, because basically they have an army now that is just paid mercenaries. It doesn't have our brothers and sisters in there to say, hey, what are we doing? Because all they got is a bunch of people that want to, hey, give me money and I'll go shoot people, okay? So, like I say, even good positions can be manipulated. And so, when they have so much control, and they think of dissent, they do think of the dissent. So, why is TrineDay has 150 books out there? Okay, we can't get a Wikipedia page, and our stuff isn't part of the dialogue, isn't part of the dialogue, because they want stuff that's that's really outrageous that they can just toss off the scene. So I'm so happy when Paul and Liz brought this book to me, and I read it, and I saw what they had gone through, okay, and what they were looking to do, and it's amazing, and it's not just us that are sitting and talking about how we can make our world better, but there's lots of people, and it's happening. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for the discussion, and onward.
Thank you, Kris. Quick question. The editor who was picked up and thrown in jail for 3 days, he was not in America, right?
No, he was in the Philippines.
Right. I knew that. I wanted to bring that up because then you make the very great point. Wow, look how precious our rights under the Constitution. That generally can't happen to people in America, and we've got to fight like heck to maintain those kind of rights. I believe that was your point, and I just wanted to bring that out. I see a couple folks, Cynthia and Elaine. Would you please mute yourselves until later in the conversation, just in case any background noise comes up? That would be absolutely fantastic. And our next co-hosts, authors, husband and wife, Paul Fitzgerald and Elizabeth Gould.
Thank you so much, Bruce, and thank you, Kris, for a great introduction. And it's really great to see all of you here today. I want to start out by discussing the role of how royal bloodlines control our narrative and thereby our myths. These bloodlines, going back thousands of years, have claimed divine rights over the people because they can trace their lineage back to the great gods and goddesses. And these same bloodlines make sure that most of humanity is deprived of knowing their own past through the constant destructive process of empire building. Our invitation to you today is to join us in our journey back to the source of our collective human narrative, the source of myth that these bloodlines claim they own in perpetuity. We are all connected to the same divine source of creation that these bloodlines claim for themselves. The only difference is that most of us can't read about our past in history books. This presentation is about the creation of the Fitzgerald family myths that still have meaning today through the JFK legacy, a man of the people. It is a guide to understanding how all myths are the real mystical stories of human encounters with our divine source, handed down from generation to generation. We are all connected to that source through dreams, synchronicities, and all our senses. the time has come to understand the narrative process and its connection to our own mythologies. Myths have been created by every culture worldwide for thousands of years to tell their stories of encounters with otherworldly beings engaged in human affairs. The uniqueness of these myths provide a broader perspective on how multidimensional experiences have been passed on through storytelling. When myths are matched with fact-based historical records, that interaction aids in deciphering the more complex meaning of both the mythological story and the fact-based historical record. Now we come to the focus of our discussion, and it starts with a question. Why does the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy still haunt us so deeply to this day? We all know that something about the potential of America died along with our president on November 22nd, 1963, that has never returned. We decided to find out what it is. In our research into the Fitzgerald history, we found that certain myths surrounding the family's connection to the mystical Camelot legend provided clues. These clues motivated us to rethink what we, the people, can actually do to bring forward the peaceful America that JFK was trying to create for us. But before restoring JFK's dream of peace, we need to know what really happened to him. And in our last roundtable, we laid out why killing the only Roman Catholic president of the United States on the site of the first Masonic temple in Dallas on the Masonic Day of Revenge for the destruction of the Knights Templar was an ancient ritual killing. Once you accept that the assassination was an act of retribution for an 800-year-old vendetta, then all kinds of new thinking becomes possible. To understand a deep state that goes back thousands of years, we must begin to ask deep questions and be willing to accept deep answers no matter where they take us. And we found our deepest answer in the mythology surrounding the Fitzgerald family. The age of myth lived on long enough in Ireland to allow us access to this multidimensional layer far beyond what literal history could have ever provided. This enabled us to understand that what has transpired following the 1097 marriage of Gerald Fitzwalter of Windsor, progenitor of the Fitzgerald dynasty, and Princess Nest, daughter of Ripe ap Tudor, King of South Wales, would result in the ritual killing of JFK. But it would also lead to his spiritual resurrection and the return of the American dream at the end of time. There are myths about the Fitzgerald family, and especially the Earls of Desmond, that must be understood. So here is an overview to start. When the Fitzgeralds came to Ireland in 1169, it prompted an outpouring of prophecies that became entwined with numerous prophetic legacies. Merlin, the Grail legends from Wales, the Irish prophets, Milan, Brecon, Patrick, Comnel, and the ancient Irish legends of Finn and the Dagda. The Fitzgeralds sought the kingship of Ireland. Ireland's kings were held to the old pre-Christian tradition of marrying the land, and the land was always represented by a local goddess. In the Fitzgerald's case, it was the sun goddess Anya. Masonic rituals replicate these ancient traditions according to the authority on Celtic mysticism, W.Y. Evans Wentz. For over 400 years, the Fitzgeralds became absorbed into the local mythology of Desmond in southwest of Ireland. And as the story goes, Gerald Fitzwalter's son, Maurice Fitzgerald, married Anya, the sun goddess. Georg Jarla, Gerald the Earl, is the product of that union, making him immortal. Anya's birth lake, Logur, is a sacred place under which Georg Jarla sleeps and will rise, riding on a white steed to help the Irish people in their time of need. The last Earl of Desmond, also named Gerald, was captured in the mountain of the Sleafmish on November 10th, 1583, and beheaded. The head was sent to Elizabeth I as a trophy, and she was said to have sat with it all morning before having it piked on London Bridge. But the Earl's body was left behind and spirited away, and its whereabouts never to be revealed. The Earl's death ended the Fitzgerald rule in Ireland, but it did not end the story. I will now take you back to the early 14th century, to the original myths that led us to these conclusions. Gerald Fitzgerald, born in 1338, known as Geroid Arla, was the third Earl of Desmond, leader of the Munster branch of the Fitzgeralds, the most powerful Norman family in late medieval Ireland. He succeeded to the earldom in 1358. Geroid was a leading example of the Gallicization of the Norman lords, and he was a noted composer of love poetry in the Irish language. The annals of the Four Masters state that Ireland was full of the fame of his wisdom. Logur in County Limerick, where he had a castle, was the center of the earldom of Desmond. In a Gaelic tradition, Anya was the goddess of the Munster sovereignty. The Fitzgeralds, as the new Norman overlords of Munster, expropriated this symbolism to themselves. A poet in the employ of the Fitzgeralds in the 14th century referred to Gerald's father, Maurice, as Anya's king, and to Gerald himself as the son of Anya's knight. This idea was embedded in a story which was still current in the late 19th century folklore of the area. According to the lore, Maurice was walking one day by the shore of Logur when he saw a beautiful otherworld woman, Anya, bathing. He seized her cloak, which magically put her under his power, and then lay with her. Anya told Maurice that she would bear him a son, Geroid Arla, whom he was to raise with all possible care. One caution, however, she gave to Maurice: if he was not to show surprise at anything, however strange, his son should do. The boy grew to manhood, and one night there was a gathering at a castle with dancing. And of all the ladies dancing, none could vie with a certain one. The grace and endurance of one young lady was only beaten by Geroid Arla himself. When the dance ended, the lady engaged him in another contest. She arose and at one leap cleared the guests, the tables, dishes, and then leaped back again. The old earl turned to his son and said, "Can you do anything like that?" "No," said Geroid. "Well, don't just stand there, try. Don't let yourself be beaten by a woman." Thus commanded, he rose to his feet, leaped into a bottle, and then leaped out again. There was great admiration for his feat. The old earl looked with the greatest astonishment at his son, who he never thought had such power. Were you not warned," said the young earl, "never to show wonder at anything I might do?" By his show of astonishment, the old earl cast his son out of the normal world for people, because he had been identified as otherworldly, patterned on his mother. And he became classified, because he would become classified as a demigod and could no longer comfortably live in the mundane. He was now bound to follow her into the supernatural. "Now you have forced me to leave you," were the last words he said to his father. And at that, Geroid left the castle, entered the water of the nearby river, and swam away in the form of a goose. The mass of folklore concerning Geroid also has him succeed to the earldom and gain fame in that position. In that folklore, he had not really died. He had disappeared from the world for some mysterious reason. This motif is connected with the political fortunes of the Desmond Fitzgeralds in the generations after the death of Geroid, their most famous and popular earl. And during the 15th century, the rulers of England grew nervous of the growing power of the Desmond earls, who ruled Munster like kings. The Fitzgeralds, however, were astute, and despite continued provocation, they managed to maintain their position. Their prestige was high throughout Europe, and a leading family of Florentine magnates, the Gherardini, claimed relationship and kept in contact with them. Tension mounted in the early decades of the 16th century, and with anti-Fitzgerald rumors being circulated in England that they were plotting to invade the country and seize power. In 1558, the 14th Earl of Desmond succeeded to the title. His name was Gerald, the first of the name in the line since the celebrated Geroid Arla. He was, however, deprived by the English of his vast family estates and kept in captivity in London for long periods. He was allowed to return home to Logur in 1573, but immediately began to take a defiant pro-Irish stance. Within a few years, he had joined with his cousin in rebellion. Hopes ran high, and messianic prophecies were circulated to bolster the Fitzgerald campaign. Remnants of these prophecies in later folklore show that the new Georgiala was being portrayed as embodying the great Fitzgerald spirit of his ancestral namesake. From their contacts in Florence, the Fitzgeralds would have heard of the lore of the Messianic Emperor Frederick I, who had died in 1190, but who was claimed to be alive and waiting to return. And there were several indications that legends of that emperor became embroiled in the minds of the Fitzgerald supporters with the hope for return of their fortunes through the actions of Georgiala. Popular fancy began to claim that Georgiala of olden times had not died at all, but had disappeared mysteriously from one of his castles and was waiting to return at the hour of the family's greatest need. The central messianic legend was of great importance. Versions of this are found throughout Europe concerning different great figures in history. It is said that a man passing by Logura one night saw a light in the side of the hill. He went to investigate and found the entrance to a cavern in which he saw an army of knights and horses all asleep. There was a beautiful sword on the floor, and as the man began to draw it from its scabbard, the army began to awaken. Finally, its leader, Georgiala, asked in a loud voice, had the time come yet? But the man took fright and ran away. The army fell to slumbering again, and the entrance to the cavern could not be found later. The 14th Earl of Desmond was not a very competent military man, and by 1583, Gerald's cause was completely lost, and he was slain. But the great affection for the Fitzgerald family lived on, as did the hope that one of them would free Ireland someday. There are reported references to this mystical belief in literature and documents from the 17th to the 19th centuries, and the legend of Geroid's enchantment and of his sleeping army are still told. An alternative claims that the enchanted Earl rides around Logura on Midsummer Night every 7 years. He is mounted on a fine white stallion shod with silver shoes, and when these shoes wear down, he will return. It is from this lineage of Georgiala that the future Fitzgeralds gained the admiration of the Irish people that still lives on to this day. And now Paul will read from the Valediction Resurrection, where he begins to discover the foundations of his mystical family history in Ireland.
Chapter 6. The realization had come to me on my first trip to Ireland back in 1971. I'd gone searching for the intangible, kicked open an old rusty gate into a green pasture, and found myself staring into a land that time forgot. Until that moment, I hadn't realized you could do something like that. But when I did, I was in, and my experience in Afghanistan had only drawn me deeper. The world hadn't caught up to Ireland back then. Cows still grazed the green pastures among ancient stone circles, memorializing long-forgotten battles between long-forgotten heroes. New Ford automobiles were bought from dealers' catalogs on Grafton Street in Dublin, not showrooms. And if you listened carefully, you could hear the natural rhythms of ancient life in the 20th century had long since left behind. My friend Dick Reed had actually driven through the town before I realized where we'd been. I think that was it, he said as he slowed his Ford Capri on the outskirts of Abbeyfield, the tiny market town my grandfather Mike had deserted for America in 1898 as a young man. What was it? I asked, straining my neck to look back at the small cluster of stone and masonry buildings by the side of the road. Where you come from, he said, struggling to point the nose of the car 180 degrees in the opposite direction. We've almost reached the crossroads of Limerick and Cork. Dick had been a voice coach, a mentor, and a friend, and while on sabbatical had grown a beard and that rendered him the spitting image of Captain Ahab. He'd been studying for his doctorate in Irish history for a year at Trinity College and probably knew his place as well as the locals. He'd also done a fair share of his research on the Desmond branch of the Fitzgeralds and cued me in on what he'd called their complicated relationship with each other and to London. This is the place, he said as he dropped me off at the door of an unassuming storefront with a sign reading the Palace Inn Pub, swinging overhead. It has to be. Where are you headed next? I asked him as the backseat passenger shifted up to my empty seat. Down to the Ring of Kerry and Dingle. We'll be back through in a couple of days, so we'll pick you up on Sunday afternoon, he said, revving the engine before speeding off. Abbeyfield was a village my father never got to see, and I had returned to find out what he'd missed. Cousin Greta and her husband Willie received me with a welcome befitting a king, and my backpack was soon quartered in the upstairs guest room. But there was no time to sleep now. It was Friday, and this was Ireland, and a local festival was about to begin. It didn't take long to figure out where my father's easygoing manner had come from, as I joined in the partying and the music. These strangers were like old family members coming back for Christmas, and as the pints of Guinness flowed and the talk turned to American politics, the time sped by. "Come, escort me to the dance," a pretty young girl said after an hour or so as she wrapped her arm in mine unexpectedly. "Pretend you're my new beau from America and make all the local boys jealous." It turned out the dance was boring, and she soon slipped away with a wink and a local boy. But by the end of the evening, I'd found myself at home. The next morning, Greta and Willie took me up the hill to Minnehaha to meet my cousin Pat and his father, great uncle Ned. Mike had turned the farm over to Ned when he left for America and deeded it over in 1957 after my own father made it clear he wanted nothing to do with it. But I wondered. Minnehaha was in the heart of Desmond, 400 staggeringly beautiful acres in the foothills of the Melgahair Mountains, overlooking the valley of the River Field. Was severing his 5 daughters and 4 sons from this place the origin of the bitterness in Mike's children, to be cut off from the source of their existence before they'd had a chance to even be part of it? I felt strangely out of place with a tight feeling in my solar plexus. I was fulfilling a ritual my father should have completed as Mike's eldest son, only to have to sit at the feet of his replacement as the new patriarch of the family. It had taken too many miles and too many years to get here. Ned was 90 by the time I met him and nearly blind from his days toiling under the sun. And as we greeted each other for the first time, he seemed burdened. "Move closer," he said in a gruff voice, squinting to get a better look at me. "I want to see Billy's boy." Ned didn't need to say much more, and he didn't. It was a homecoming by the turf fire on a very typical gloomy Irish afternoon in June. My mission as a family ambassador from America had been accomplished, and we both knew it. The rest of the day was spent with cousin Pat and his wife Nancy touring the local sites, including the old Desmond Fort by the river. "There's really not much left of it," I offered as we wandered through the ruins. "You can thank Pelham for that," Pat said in an Irish brogue so thick it made me squint. "Who?" I asked. "Pelham, Sir William Pelham. And there wasn't much left of the Desmond Fitzgeralds either after Pelham came through here." "And what year was that?" I asked, bending an ear in Pat's direction as he gazed thoughtfully at the overgrown stonework. 1580. Pert Castle, it was called, the Castle of the Three Enemies. The old abbey was sacked as well because it was Catholic. "The abbey by the river Field," I found myself muttering. Abbeyfield. I tried to imagine what the place looked like before Pelham and his army got hold of it, and a feeling of doom set in. "How did this happen?" "It all started at the beginning," Pat said. "The Fitzgeralds found themselves at home with the Irish and married into their families. The English were against that sort of thing and made laws against it. The Statutes of Kilkenny, they called them. But no one paid them any mind until the earls got so powerful they had to ignore it. So they were accused of treason and breeding a race of their own. It all came down at the end with a rebellion against Elizabeth. Gerald, the last earl, wrote to her from right here, asking for a truce. He signed it April 15th, 1583, Garrett Desmond, Abbeyfield. But as you can see, it was already too late by then. That night was spent with Willie and Greta's family and their friends. At the end of the evening, we all wound up in the kitchen after closing hours singing songs, but Hare was not among their favorites. "Surely you must know Bing Crosby and Pat Boone," they said, as I tried to explain that Bing and Pat were part of another era, but they'd have none of it. My friend Dick arrived the next day on schedule. I introduced him to Greta and Willie, and we were soon gone, back to Dublin with my heart in my throat. "How was that?" Dick asked, glaring at me suspiciously from the corner of his eye. "I'm not really sure," I said, feeling that fight or flight feeling creeping back into my solar plexus. "There's something about this place. Everyone seems happy, but there's something missing." "You've been called, Paul," Dick said with a look that crossed somewhere between panic and jubilation. "You've been hearing the voice of this place all your life, and you've answered it." I tried not to smile. "What are you talking about?" "Your family came here nearly 900 years ago for one reason. Gerald, the very first Gerald of Windsor, was sent here as an ambassador to the provincial king of Munster, Mir Hatak O'Brien, in 1102, almost 70 years before the Norman invasion. By 1169, the relationship between South Wales and Desmond was already well established. They were just going through the motions as a pretext, to fool Henry II. Mir Hatak was the grandson of Brian Boru, the legendary Irish king. They wanted to unite the kingdoms of Wales and Ireland to roll back the conquest of Britain, and Gerald was helping them do it. I was confused. So Gerald was forging a political alliance with the Welsh and the Irish natives against the King of England. That must have been pretty risky. But what is this voice you're talking about? Dick grew quiet. The old Irish claimed descent from the mother of the Irish gods, Anya, Danu, Dana, an ancient line that hadn't lost its connection to the other world. After a couple of whiskeys, you can get the old professors at Trinity to talk about them. Evan Wentz did a study back at the turn of the century and wrote a book about it, Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries. It was much easier to hear back then without the cars and the TVs. But when you come down here, you understand why the Normans wanted to be the kings of Ireland, because the kings of Ireland have a straight line to the gods. I hadn't fully appreciated what Dick revealed to me back in 1971, but now that I understood the context of the Fitzgeralds in Ireland through the Elizabethan writers like Hooker, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. Dick was totally taken by the Geraldine embrace of the Celtic otherworld and its embrace of them, I told Liz, as she shuttled around the kitchen getting dinner ready. He really believed in what they'd set out to do in 1102. And he really believed you were fulfilling it, Liz said. I don't know what he really believed, but I know we made a stop in Wexford at the tomb of Strongbow on the way down to Abbeyfield. I thought Strongbow was buried in Dublin at Christ Church. I did too, but he insisted that Christ Church was just a memorial and that Wexford was the real place. He said that he'd brought me there to see the grave of my ancestor. Liz shook her head in disbelief. You know, a lot of people claim to be descended from the rich and famous, but how many can trace themselves back to the mother of the gods? I don't know about that, I said, trying to dampen her enthusiasm. Some ancient myth about bringing fertility to the land by impregnating a local sun goddess sounded a little fishy to me, don't you think? But that is the mythology, isn't it? You said. He filled you in on it on the ride back to Dublin. Yeah, he spent the whole ride talking about it. Gerald's son, Maurice, found Anya, the mother of the Irish gods, bathing on the shores of Logur. He seized her cloak and took her for his own. Took her, Liz said, raising an eyebrow. Really? The Irish are very demure when it comes to sex. Anyway, the product of the union was Geroy the Arla, Gerald the Earl, which gives all the descendants otherworldly powers. That certainly explains our daughter Alyssa, Liz said, as she rattled through the cabinet, looking for plates. I'll now read from the Expugnatio Hibernica by Gerald of Wales, an account of the 1169 Norman invasion of Ireland, written in 1189. Gerald of Wales was the grandson of Gerald of Windsor and Princess Nest, a prolific writer and influential figure in the 12th century, and known to frame the events of his day through a mythic lens. In this example, Gerald frames a 6th century prophecy of Merlin Sylvester, but 12th century sensibilities, by naming the 1170 murder of Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, as the martyr described by Merlin 600 years before. The chapter is titled The Martyrdom of Thomas. Thomas, Archbishop of Canterbury, fell victim to the swords of wicked men in England, an event which brought considerable disgrace on the reading men of the kingdom and of the clergy. He had endured that multiple martyrdom of an exile, lasting almost 7 years in great sorrow, clad in 2 layers of sackcloth, both of his inner and outer garment, constantly reading and praying, the worst of his hardships being the wretched outlawing of all his connection without respect for sex of age. But besides that, the luster of his whole martyrdom was crowned by all the following circumstances: that he personally opened the doors to the church to his enemies, men mad with hate, and running towards their swords with head uncovered, he placed the hallowed crown of his head in the path of their blows. That he was killed in the mother church before the altar, that his murderers were 4 of the dogs of the palace, raging with a fury more than canine, from whom he received 4 wounds upon the crown of his head, that this soldier of Christ, and noble martyr, fearlessly enduring suffering, gained the distinction of martyrdom only in that part of the body which represents Christ's passion, that he sanctified with his own blood and the sacred week of our Lord's birth. And just as the first Thomas preceded our Lord's birthday by 5 days, so the second Thomas rounded off the same number of days after Christmas, that the other Thomas illuminated the east, this one the west, that the other cast his light over the church at its birth, this one in its declining years, just as the first Thomas cemented with his own blood the foundations of a church which was rising from the ground, so this one by shedding of his blood restored to its former state a church which had been founded long since, but, so to speak, in a ruinous state. Just as the first Thomas was ardent when the faith was burning brightly, so this Thomas was not only ardent, but more than ardent in our time, when the ardent of faith is cooling. Just as St. Thomas exposed his body to cruel tortures to exalt this actual fabric of the church, so Thomas Becket did not shrink from becoming a victim of the sword, so that he might preserve intact the spiritual form of the church. These two short verses sum up very well the triumphant glory of such a mighty victory. A true lover of Christ died for the spouse of Christ close to Christ's birthday in Christ's church. When his limbs had been scattered and thrown out of the grave, he put new ones in their place, a kind of miracle heretofore unheard of, and by displaying this new kind of miraculous power, truly appeared as a new martyr. And here, Gerald of Wales repeats the 6th century prophecy. Nor could this escape the notice of our prophet Sylvester, who says, a new martyr will be revealed by a new kind of miracle. In Western lands and in the age when the world is drawing to its end, he will, by his own peculiar power, restore the maimed and the wretched limbs that have been wrenched out or cut off. And again, grief will be transformed into joy when sons butcher their father in their mother's womb. The West will enjoy what was formerly the prerogative of the East, and at the setting of the sun, while the sun rises in its setting, while its light seems to be quenched and extinguished, the daylight illumines with a new brightness the mists of the Western land and of the closing age of the world. Orators will come from the East, and princes and principal men will worship the footsteps of a new martyr in the lands that lie on the western borders of the ocean. Gerald of Wales then ends his comments by stating, all of these prophecies emanating from the aforesaid prophet clearly refer to this same martyr, as will be clearly shown in the book of prophecies. Now, this grain of wheat fell, and in falling to the earth brought forth a great harvest. Around the 54th year of his life, the 8th year after his consecration, and the 7th of his exile. He completed the course of his life and won the victor's prize at the end of December, ending the old life with the old year and entering on a new one in the year 1171 from our Lord's incarnation.
Gerald of Wales named Thomas Becket as the 12th century martyr whose sacrifice in 1170 matched the description written down in Merlin Sylvester's 6th century prophecy. For our ending today, we will update this prophecy for a 21st century sensibility. We have chosen to name John Fitzgerald Kennedy as the martyr that fulfilled it. We have titled it Transforming Revenge and Retribution into the Resurrection of JFK in the USA. Quote, JFK is the martyr, the slain son revealed by a new kind of miracle in Western lands. And in the age when the world is drawing to its end, he will, by his own peculiar power, restore the maimed and the wretched limbs that have wrenched out or cut off. And again, grief will be transformed into joy when the fathers stop sacrificing their sons to endless wars and recognize the son's right to bring peace to the world. The fathers have been coveting control of the mother's womb against the son's own rights to his mother's wisdom. The West will enjoy what was formerly the prerogative of the East, and at the setting of the sun, while the sun rises in the setting, while its light seems to be quenched and extinguished, a daylight illumines with a new brightness and the mists of the Western land and the closing age of the world. Orators will come from the East, and princes and principal men will worship the footsteps of a new martyr in the lands that lie on the western borders of the ocean. End of quote. The last Earl of Desmond was slain in 1583 while fighting to the bitter end for the Irish people. Even with that devastating blow to the cause of Irish freedom, the affection for the Fitzgerald family continued to grow and has lived on to this day. As the President of the United States, John Fitzgerald Kennedy rose to that level of his great ancestor and won the affection of the American people. When JFK was killed, his dream for the American peace to sweep the world was also killed. If we who believe in his vision can come together, we can resurrect JFK's dream for America and restore hope to the world that was lost with his death. The mystical Giardiarla and his army of phantom soldiers have already been stirred from their slumber and will rise from Logora to help JFK's spirit return to the American people at our time of greatest need. This is how the power of myth really works. I always cry at that line.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.
And now, Carol, you need to unmute yourself. Carol Brouillet.
That was very powerful. My own political awakening was catalyzed by Oliver Stone's film JFK in 1992. When I researched the assassination of the CIA, I was horrified. And I felt that I was living in Germany during the Nazi era, except that people had no idea that the atrocities were taking place in countries outside of our national boundaries. I became an activist, much to the surprise of friends and families. But my efforts brought me new allies, new friends, and new purpose. Two friends were Liz and Paul in the late 90s. In 2001, in the wake of 9/11, the best historical parallel at that time was the Reichstag fire. The Patriot Act mirrored the Enabling Act. We fought and witnessed the expansion of the police and the surveillance state. I spearheaded the first San Francisco International Inquiry into 9/11 and invited Kris to speak, as well as Paul and Liz, who as investigative journalists spoke on the American role in the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and how that played in the lead up to 9/11. My relationship with Kris, Liz, and Paul has evolved over decades. Liz and Paul have continued to research into the causes of the Soviet invasion. They eventually included a new focus beyond politics to ask the deeper question, what does this mean both mystically and personally? After 40 years, they have answered that question in their own story, The Valediction, The Three Nights of Desmond, and The Valediction, Resurrection. They began this journey looking into the seeds of empire as they describe the Ahrimanic forces which have given birth to imperial ambition, a drive which leads to insanity and self-destruction. For thousands of years, empires have risen and fallen. Wars and warfare have evolved to eclipse and expand into every aspect of existence, especially the heart, the soul, and the minds of humanity. Would-be rulers have always used the divide and conquer strategy. In Paul's Dark Night of the Soul, in a dream and in the physical reality of his ancestral lands, he faces his own black night and miraculously breaks the cycle of violence and revenge to bring us his own personal gift of insight and redemption. Saints, visionaries have always called upon love, forgiveness, courage to heal, to strengthen, to unite individuals, families, communities, countries. Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., John Fitzgerald Kennedy, all evoked love, courage, and a spirit of sacrifice in their followers to realize their dreams. Joseph Campbell wrote and spoke about the hero's journey, the myths that permeate the world, and the trek that every human soul makes when they choose to be born. It is the personal quest for consciousness, for meaning, for purpose, to overcome the unconscious boundaries that are imposed upon us by culture. Paul's epic journey gives us a breathtaking panorama of his Fitzgerald lineage going back to 12th century Ireland and beyond then, revealing his personal transformation, the casting light upon the sacred sacrifices of kings that has given birth to empires and continues to this day. We should ask the question, did JFK consciously sacrifice his life in pursuit of his dream of world peace? And what does that mean for Paul and America today? 30 years after my political awakening, my focus has shifted and aligned with Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s continuing quest to save our constitutional republic in embrace of his uncle's vision. On Sunday, January 23rd, I watched thousands of people gather and march on the National Mall despite the freezing temperatures, to defeat the mandates. I was with them in spirit, even if I was in a warm climate, watching events unfold live on my computer screen. I recognized and knew many of the speakers from previous rallies. I'd hugged them, heard them, and appreciated their words before, although some were new to me. There were many heroes who spoke, and many who didn't have time to speak, despite their efforts to be there and endure the cold. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. spoke. I know him. I've read his books. I've heard him speak before in person and in various speeches online. I have the greatest respect for him. It was a clear and powerful message ignored by the mainstream media, except for his reference to Anne Frank that was turned into an attack upon him. When I was a child, the age of Anne Frank, I read her diary. I read multiple stories about the Holocaust. That era was seared into my brain. Her story demands readers to ask themselves, what would you do have you been born in Germany at that time? What would you have done if you were Jewish or if you were Christian? RFK Jr. hit the nail on the head. In his reference to Anne Frank, in that era, people could try to hide or escape. With the intrusion of modern technology, especially all the electronic surveillance and tracking devices, and the corruption and capture of governments throughout the world, we must all resist. We must all not comply. We must all push back. Power will not give us back the rights that it steals from us. It will continue to abuse us and seek even more power to control every aspect of our lives. Every major religion was represented that day, united, truly. The spirit of Martin Luther King Jr. was evoked to call upon everyone to go to the mountaintop, to our God, to our higher selves, to the deepest part of our souls, to find the courage to be our best selves, to take on the enormous challenges that we face today. We have to recognize that only love is stronger than fear. Evil seeks to divide and conquer, to deceive, to destroy, to differentiate. Love brings people together, creates community, heals heart and soul, and gives birth to creativity, meaning, and purpose. Those who've wandered in the wilderness, heard the voice of God, born powerful visions, have been called prophets, saints, the touched, or just plain old crazy. They've inspired multitudes, toppled empires, championed love. JFK's nephew, RFK Jr., has consciously followed in his uncle's footsteps. The power of truth, personal beliefs are so threatening to the corrupt regimes trying to enslave us that they have most recently decreed us terrorists and threatened to seize our wealth and criminalize us. Already, a new art of self-censorship has been born as people try to communicate online without triggering the big tech censors and getting excommunicated from various platforms. Will the insanity of empire destroy itself and allow for the birth of a new narrative, one that honors freedom, peace, justice, truth? Is this new struggle going on within every human heart, demanding that each of us choose between acting out of fear or love? Will we reach the critical mass needed to turn the tide, to resurrect the deeply held dreams, visions shared by all? Can we unlock our own power? Is this the vital piece needed to solve this puzzle and move us individually and collectively towards redemption? Thank you, Paul and Liz, for helping light the way to solving this puzzle.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol.
And we are in the question and comment portion. And like an air traffic controller looking at all you lovely airplanes, we've simplified the process. Somehow raise your hand or say my name and allow me to designate whom among you shall ask a question or give a comment. Have mercy on me. Who has the first question? You've got to unmute yourself. When you speak, unmute yourself. Who's got the first question? I'm doing this visually and auditorily. I'm not referring to the chats.
Hello.
So, hello.
I'm Colleen.
Colleen, I did see and hear you first. Please tell us your question or your comment.
Well, I wrote it in the chat, but I'll read it.
Thank you.
Okay. If the date for the Kennedy assassination was selected for a ritual murder, what about plans to assassinate earlier in Tampa and Chicago? Is it your position that earlier dates and times were rejected to conform to the ritual killing date?
No, not necessarily. I don't think, I think it is simply the date that it happened on. So I don't think that, there were many events that were claimed to be this and that, but the one that happened is the one we're focused on. And the coincidences of the amount of Masonic symbolism in that one event does,
Are overwhelming
yeah.
number of Masonic symbolic attributes to it. But it's possible too that, that these things were done in rehearsal for November 22nd. That's also a possibility as well.
Too,
So.
Yeah, I think we're just taking the position that is in fact the day it happened, and it does tie into this deeper historical connection back to. In fact, we did get a letter from a modern day heretic in 2016 when we were promoting the idea that it was time to end the revenge and retribution cycle, and he made it very clear, as far as he was concerned, this is a Masonic country, and JFK simply had to, accept the fact that he was going to be sacrificed. So even though a lot of people may not realize that there are people who actually, that was their motivation. So that's the tie-in.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you. Joyce, Lynn, I did see you attempt, I believe, to speak or forever hold your peace. Who's got the next question?
Well, I put in the chat, so I might as well just ask it. Liz and Paul, first of all of you, that was excellent presentation. Carol, your remarks were striking. Liz and Paul, do you feel that the tragedies that have befallen other Kennedys, Robert Kennedy especially, maybe John Jr. and Ted Kennedy, are part of this ritual sacrifice or not?
Well, I am personally of the belief that when you're dealing with people who are basically major players at the global level, that obviously the Kennedy family was, anytime you're dealing, whether it's Princess Di or, Lord Mountbatten, any of these people dying, can be, you may automatically assume, so to speak, it's a kind of ritual sacrifice at some level. Because that's the world they live in. That's where it happens. That's what it's applied to. The rest of us are just victims, but we can get killed too, but we're just victims. But in their case, it's oftentimes, tied in some way to, I know there's a lot of evidence to suggest that, like, Princess Di was ritually sacrificed. But we're not really trying to say that. I think that there are political tie-ins and there are deeper tie-ins. I guess that's what I would say. And that's why I brought up the heretic that wrote us the letter in 2016.
I also think too, though, that what we're seeing today in the actions of our world leaders is something that has been planned out from the very beginning, going back at least 1,000 years, if not much longer than that. And if you trace back into individual family histories, the way we just happen to have a record of the Fitzgerald family progress from coming to Ireland and into Wales, actually from 1066 on, from the Battle of Hastings on, you can actually look at the various intrigues that were involved with that, and you can see that there are alignments that are still valid, and even family names that are still valid. I think in Britain right now, I think Norman names are the most people that graduate from the exclusive universities are Norman descendants, Anglo-Normans. So, the evolution of this process, you can't say, well, it happens like this. It's evolved over time, but I think the objective is the same. And that is to return control to a very narrow, small group of people who refer to themselves as the bloodline.
Thank you.
Thank you. Who has the next question or comment? Please speak up. I'm listening intently. I see a hand. Ruth Gould Goodman, please unmute yourself.
First of all, thank you so much. And these are really strange times, and there's a real need for consolidation of clarity and understanding to meet the oppressive forces that are just obfuscating and coming in on every direction. And what I'm hearing in this talk is that having a sense of our lineage, our divine lineage, and understanding that is our deeper identity helps us construct a story that is like creates a strong immunity to the fear that is being used to manipulate us. And but I have this sense of us needing to really create profound networks together at this level of knowledge, not just to talk, but to somehow understand ourselves and come together. I just wondered if there is any sense that you have, or anyone who's here, of what we can do to amplify the power of a story, the revelation of a story like this, but to not just have it be individual, to really have it be an app, be able to synergize a large population.
Well,
Panelists?
I definitely feel that, in fact, the whole idea of self-empowerment at an authentic level, okay, that is centered on, the common bond of people and at the people level, and that's what we're talking about. That people have been so disconnected from the source of their own, of their own power, and have been completely removed from the idea that they even have any power. So I think that that's like a primal stage. Okay, that's why when we're talking about, like, the idea is that the royal bloodlines are as royal. We're saying is we're as royal as they are, is what we're trying to say. Is like that the idea that they have an especially special, okay, line that gives them the right to basically control the world forever, okay, is something that when you really think of it, say, well, how did that happen? I mean, if you are right now believe that you're connected to people, 2,000 years ago, let's say, all right, and it, you have a family history that goes back 2,000 years, right? Well, there's a lot of people who are actually connected too, but they just don't know it. So, I mean, it isn't just the Merovingians who are connected to the lineage of Jesus and Mary Magdalene going back to the house of David. There are millions of other people who don't know they're related because of the fact that their source of knowledge became disconnected. So I think it begins to change the way you think of the way the world has been ordered, and this sort of automatic assumption that certain people really have a right to certain privileges and certain status. Okay, not based on, who really can do the best job and who's really representing, certainly representing what I think, the primary job is, representing the people. And I think that's our whole point about, JFK rising as he did, given the opportunity with his short presidency, to have made it clear that he had chosen to be on the side of the people with whatever risks that entailed. And that's the story that we were, suggesting, that the last Earl of Desmond, in his struggle to basically rise to the occasion of the needs of the Irish people, is a similar kind of situation. In fact, it was said specifically that the last Earl wasn't the best military man. So but yet it had nothing to do with that. It had to do with the passion and what he really put all of his power into, and the fact that he bothered to try to do it. So I think in that sense, finding that kind of common ground where you can look at these people who are in these very powerful positions and begin to feel sorry for them. I think that may be a good, way to start. Feel sorry for them first.
So,
Thank you, Kris.
one thing about a blood lineage, And a lot of these people probably even aren't related to that, what they claim to be blood lineage, because the first thing a usurper does is to create a false hierarchy. Now, also there's a question in here about the plan to assassinate Kennedy. It happened in Dallas on November 22nd, and that was the revenge date. What about the attempts in Tampa and Chicago? Well, the attempts in Tampa and Chicago were not quote unquote real attempts. They were in what's known in the parlance as shakedown cruises. Okay, because you're dealing with a milieu where you've got a lot of double and triple and quadruple agents who don't know who they're actually working for, but they're gathering information and sending it back somewhere. And so you've got to find out who's talking to who. So that's why you had the Tampa and the Chicago ones, because it's like, the Chicago one was stopped because a gentleman by the name of Lee, told information about it. And it was, a lot of people think that Lee was Lee Oswald. And, another thing, going back to the Vietnam War and the protests in the late 60s and early 70s, one thing that was happening is that you had the veterans of foreign wars had their conventions, and it became a big, point. There'd be a riot in every town where they had their annual convention, and a lot of this is because the powers that be, they don't want the generations talking to each other. And one thing that they did was, we start off with the Spanish-American War, then World War I, World War II. I mean, basically you had a war every 20 years for the generation. So, what did you do in the war, Dad? And so again, part of the process of those protests were to get so that, this generation wouldn't be talking to this generation. Okay. And then one thing that happened in Portland when we had the Veterans of Foreign Wars Convention was coming to Portland. Okay, and there was going to be a riot. It was a big, and so what happened? Us hippies got together and says, hey, I tell you what, we went to the governor and we says, we'll throw a party out of town a ways, and we'll get all the kids out of town. There won't be a riot. The governor got on board and did it. We had a party and we didn't have a riot. Okay, and that stops the cycle that the powers that be want to create, so that again we're just like this. Okay, so onwards, we've got lots of good things happening.
Thank
Well,
you,
this
Chris.
is one of them.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah.
Indeed. Who has the next question or comment? Please speak up so you can be recognized. You've got to unmute yourself if you're going to say your name or call my name to ask your question. Who has the next question or comment? The Mexican standoff. Those who've written chat questions are wondering, we're going to make Bruce read the chat questions. Fine. That's what these reading glasses are for. Hold on. We'll see if we've gotten there. Starting from the top, Josiah says, hi, everyone. Question for the second half. The current technocratic state movement and AI tech immortality arms race seems like both the child of the CIA military industrial complex that opposed JFK, and in many ways, an attempt to control a new vision of enlightenment or ascension. Where do you think this is going?
Well, I just heard a comment from a scholar, actually he's a Gnostic scholar, and he basically drew a line between theocracy and technocracy. So I think the idea that you're really getting the same mentality of this ancient priesthood that really is kind of the core behind the idea of controlling humans, which you have to go back to actually. I think the oldest line I've read about goes back 6,000 years before Plato, during the Zoroastrian Magi. Apparently there were ideas that were brewing coming out of in this time period that eventually became connected to the emerging civilizations and the management of humans. And apparently there are two schools of thought within this is within the Gnostics, apparently. And one school was very believing in the humans and aiding and helping the humans, and the other side really felt they needed to control humans. So you had that split, apparently, and that goes back, would be 7,000 years we're talking about. And from what I understand, they were actually called Illuminati. So if you look at the modern expression, starting in the 18th century, it does seem to match the kind of thinking, which is, we need to run the world. We need to basically take care of humans because they're incapable of taking care of themselves.
And I would position TrineDay's books as kind of the other side of the coin. The mainstream, quote unquote, mainstream, and the official voices describe AI and the enhancements as inevitable, and emphasize often the benefits of it for learning and for capabilities. And yet, let's say you read all 150, 149, almost 150 TrineDay books. It describes a lot of the same events, but by showing the people with the money and their connect relations, their scholastic, schools they attended together, their memberships in secret societies. And for me, looking at kind of both sides, for whatever benefit there might be to AI and transhumanism, blatantly obvious to me is how they could insidiously control us. So TrineDay.com. Jordan has 15 TrineDay books behind him. Jordan, are you still on this call? I got two screens to flip through. Jordan Vizot, friend of mine.
I am still here, yes.
Those 50. Okay, you are the host of Divulgence Podcast. Please take 30 to 60 seconds or more to talk to us about why you love TrineDay books, or specifically the contents of this roundtable, my friend.
Just to speak on TrineDay, I don't know when I first came across my. Sorry, one sec. There's something.
No rush. He's muted to strangle some background noise. Oh.
Sorry. I can't remember what my first TrineDay title was, or where I first came across them. I do remember seeing Kris on Sam Tripoli's show. I think that might be around the time when I first came across TrineDay, and I was just very impressed with the not only a nice range of topics that I'm interested in, but also a nice range of subtopics. For example, if you're into the Kennedy stuff, there is William Law's book on the autopsy, or you can go with something more into the conspiracy in general. I'm just trying to look at some of the titles quickly here.
I just wanted to shout out about you having 15 of those books behind you. And what's your takeaway from this roundtable in about 30, 40 seconds, Jordan?
I mean, there's so much to take away, but I mean, the bloodlines thing is a key piece. It's we don't know. I mean, one of the biggest, I forget who it was, they mentioned what's the biggest takeaway or the biggest detriment from the Kennedy murder assassination. And I think still not knowing and having enough answers kind of keeps us in a sort of perpetual state of worry and for some anxiety when they're trying to figure out what they want to believe and who they want to trust and what the role of the government truly is. So I think it's something that should be definitely kind of studied and looked at when you're trying to reflect on yourself and what your beliefs are. So without
You are
without
definitely
going crazy, I'll
preaching
just
to
kind of
a-
leave it there.
Right.
Yeah, that you're preaching to a choir that.
Yeah, I'm sure you all you understand what I'm saying, so I won't wet it down any more than that.
Thank you, Jordan. I see Kris with a reply.
One thing one thing that he brings up is, the generational differences, okay, between, I grew up in, born in the 40s, grew up in the 50s, to a very, we had a nice little grandfather as a president, and it was a very welcoming time, okay? And then, I had that world shattered, okay, by the assassination of JFK, okay? But now here we've got generation. I mean, the assassination happened, before they were born, okay? So they're coming up and they're having to deal with, with all of this stuff, okay? And like he says, trying to figure out who to believe, what to believe, okay? When in the 50s, I mean, the feeling and what John F. Kennedy, the hope that he brought for America, and looking at peace as a way to go forward and to deal with our quote unquote enemies by talking to them, not by bombing them, okay? And so I feel very much for the younger generation and for these people, having to deal with trying to understand, okay, this violence that, destroyed our country, basically, this violent act that really we're still talking about it.
And rightfully so. Rightfully so. I want to keep moving on and get all these questions in from the chat before. Ruth, hold on. Give me a couple minutes, Ruth, and I will definitely see you raise your hand again. I want Todd Armstrong, my friend from Goodness Over Darkness podcast, has put this in. Man merging with machine is thousands of years in the making. It's what the Bible was warning against. They didn't have the same language for it that we do today, but this is exactly what was being prophesied. Where it's going is they're trying to get us to switch places with them, get our consciousness out of our bodies so that they can take over them and keep us in the metaverse, outer space, hyperspace. Todd, do you want to elucidate further on that and unmute? Or if you don't unmute, maybe you've stepped away. But who wants to talk about? Oh, hi, Todd.
Hey, Bruce. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. And I've read your question, so if you, yeah.
Yeah, and I was just responding to the first question that was on there. But yeah, this has been a very informative discussion about JFK and his lineage and how it's been set up. I mean, all of this has been predicted, and it's so tough to understand how we can actually move about when we have like the trucker convoy, and we can see how it's being used for nefarious means, but it's also standing up for our rights, and it just gets in a place where what can we actually do that isn't going to be used against us, and how can we actually stand up for our rights without it hurting ourselves?
Why don't we take that and open that up for reply? Folks, panelists, you can reply to either what I read from Todd's chat or from what he just said. Hello, Liz.
Hi there. That is a question I hear all the time, people asking, how do I begin? Where is the first step? And I think that was really our point about it. You have to begin by, I think, rethinking, the way in which you have been framed and looking out. We all come with a whole bunch of preconceived lots of things, and not all of them are necessarily throwaway things. It's about really being able to back off and begin to just look at the architecture that you're carrying with you that you discover really isn't useful. And it really isn't making things, easier to understand. And I think, again, too, when you bring up the technocracy and the whole thing with technology, the mesmerizing effect of humans and technology is something that's pretty ancient. If you go back to the Sumerian end of the Sumerian Empire, there is an actual lament written by a bard that if you read it right now, you would say it sounds like today. It's identical to today. Okay. So
Liz, could I possibly thank you that far, get through the last couple of questions on the chat, and then there'll be plenty of time to pick this up if that's okay?
Sure, fine.
All right, because you were echoing trying to diagnose what the problem is with technology, and we could do endless on that, but I want to read what Jane has typed. Carol is correct. If every single individual in the world steps up and says enough, the globalists will be defeated. The truckers have showed us the way. Now, if we can only figure out how to unbrainwash the muggles. Suggestions? Carol, how would you reply?
Well, Jane's an incredibly powerful writer, and everyone should read Jane's books too. But I also wanted to give a plug. I love Kris's books, and that's one reason I asked him to speak at the San Francisco International Inquiry into 9/11. He published a book called Skull and Bones, and he also wrote one called Fleshing Out Skull and Bones, which looked at the secret societies. And with his background, with his dad being a CIA agent, I mean, that's what really took me down the rabbit hole, the exposure of the CIA and the dark side of the shadow side of the US government. And RFK Jr. has written some outstanding books, including one about his family. I think it's called American Values, and his latest, The Real Anthony Fauci. And both of these should have been on bestseller lists. And he was assassinated by the media and by amazing sort of censorship, completely ignored. And his words are really powerful, especially pointing out John F. Kennedy's being, his family history, his impact upon the world, and also RFK Jr.'s personal experience traveling to so many different countries and the response he got from people throughout Europe and Asia and all over the world, and the love they had for John F. Kennedy and what a huge impact he had on the world, which I think goes back to what Paul and Liz were saying, because I think if we could have this resurrection of the ideals of John F. Kennedy, who inspired a lot of the independence movements throughout the world, right now, that's the crisis that we're facing. It's this top-down transhuman technocracy vision that everyone is fighting against, and through all these creative means. And I think it's each of us finding that soul power, getting together, and that's happening. I mean,
Carol, if I could, I want to
go ahead.
I want to pick up that baton. Liz, let me make one quick point about the joy of books about John F. Kennedy. Oh, look, there's one over my shoulder called God School 9/11 and JFK by Bruce de Torres. Read all about it at brucedetorres.com. To the point that I said at the top, to study his assassination is to discover the man, John F. Kennedy, and his courage. And he was the embodiment, like I said at the top, of an American ideal, which is simply give me liberty or give me death. And when enough human beings embody that, things will really, really change. And to encourage that is a very personal thing. And there is not time for me to elucidate that, but there is time for me to read another question in the chat.
Before you go on, Bruce, hello.
Hi, Liz. Hi, Liz.
Yeah, I did want to make one comment based on Carol, because it completes what I was trying to say. Okay. And then I'll shut up. Okay. All right. What we are suggesting is a real movement to actually try to bring all of the angst and all of this mourning that people have been suffering from since JFK died, and give them another way to build something positive out of it. So it is not about letting go of the death and how it happened and wanting to know the reality of that, but it's about simultaneously raising him from the dead, raising the good stuff and making that a movement. So not all the energy is in just this angst over why they don't know the truth. And the fact is that there are so many possibilities here of what could have contributed. This gives a single focus that we can all believe in. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Just to appreciate folks who took the time to write the questions here, and then we've got plenty of time to get to everybody. Ruth, I haven't forgotten you. You are pinned in here as a go-to. Dean has written, the strategy of the globalist imperialist cabal has always been to divide and conquer and use fear and control of the narrative to distract us from the truth. So the question before us is, how do we reclaim the narrative? I'd like to give the panel about 90 seconds. How do we reclaim the narrative?
We're doing it.
Yeah, I agree.
Mhm.
Well, I just state what I'm
That's
just
the only way is to do it. You can't dream it up. You can't wish it up. It's called work.
And your homework assignment, ladies and gentlemen, the work that Kris just described starts with the 149 books this man has published to make you certain, or at least open your mind so that you, the members of the jury, can decide if a fraction of what's coming on the television is true, and a fraction of what's in TrineDay's books are true. You're going to get some balance. You're going to find some sea legs to decide what you want to learn and study next. We
need evolution, and we can vote our way into a better future. It can be done. And that, to me, is the honest way to do it. And it stands on our Constitution. And we need more than 535 people in Washington, D.C. We need at least 6,000.
Thank you. And the second part of everyone's homework is to go to TrineDay.com and find the tab for the podcast, because in this busy world, reading is sometimes harder to do than just listening. And there are about 80 episodes. Kris has interviewed about 80 of his authors in these nice, and you learn about their books, you learn what they're coming from. They pour from their heart, their life's experience over the last many decades. It's an auxiliary, it's a complement, it's another curriculum along with the books to absorb what those authors and what Kris has seen and wants to bring, so that enough of us can get re-inspired about who and what we are under God or by natural law or under the Constitution, so that we could step up without fear. Liz, are you burning with something to share about this?
Well, I have actually a question. I would like to know how the people feel about what we're presenting, because we're asking people to take a leap into the mythic, because that's where the mythology really is. That's where the mythology is, and that's where the answers are, and as far as we're concerned.
And that's what the bloodlines control, because people have been cut off from it.
So thank you. You are asking member Ruth, how would you reply to the above solicitation for a comment?
Well, for me, when I think about what bloodlines means to me, it's like it's spoken of as a connection to the divine. And it's my belief that all of us are reclaiming our connection to our essential divinity. I feel like this whole thing with COVID has been an incredible challenge, because people have given over the natural immunity of their bodies and the incredible capacity of our living system to something that is external, and it is AI in a certain kind of way. It's an external answer to, and so the challenge of recognizing the potent creativity, capacity to imagine, that is who we are when we really know and are unplugged from the artificial that's all around us, and we plug back into heaven and earth. We become conduits of potent imagination and creative visioning, and we've been challenged with a virus that you can't see, and people I know that are so intelligent and so powerful have completely collapsed in their imagination,
You
and
know,
it's given their power away.
Ruth, I want to say something here. We've spoken at a lot of different places over the last 15, 20 years on this issue. And we spoke at Boston University. I was a freshman at Boston University in 1969. And we were invited by Stephen Kinzer to come and speak to his class. And it was absolutely astonishing. We might as well have been talking to kids who were raised on another planet. They had no framework, they had no understanding, they had no context. All that they had learned about the late 60s and early 70s, about Vietnam and the world in which they were living in, they had no understanding of the evolution of consciousness in the process that had brought us to where we were with Afghanistan at that time. So our problem is so fundamental here. And TrineDay Books, Kris has been addressing that issue. The question is that you got to spread it around to everybody. You got to get other people talking about it. And that's what's that's why the world is clamping down right now on human beings, because the consciousness has been awakened. People are aware. They are trying to confuse. The powers that be are trying to confuse and obfuscate what we know to be true. And you have to have the strength of your own conviction.
Yeah.
That's the secret, I think, to this.
Kris, I see you.
Just, I want to leave us with a quote from Kennedy that, we've all heard so many times. For the great enemy of the truth is very often not the lie, deliberately contrived and dishonest, but the myth, persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic.
Indeed. And Paul and Liz's two-part book, The Valediction, two-volume book, is this perfect intersection of facts and history and events, but a door opening into, I'll call it, our spiritual imagination. And there are plenty of TrineDay books about it. There's a lot in my book about it, about what is known by the most curious researchers and even the most scientific experts about the nature of reality, about the effect of consciousness on ourselves, on other minds at remote distances, to the awe-inspiring question, is there only one of us here? Is reality under the surface of these physical things a seamless, infinite, and eternal realm of thought, of consciousness? And that unleashes what the mystics and religious leader and spiritual folks and the Oriental traditions and what poets have to say about what we experience when we look in each other's eyes, when we look in the eyes of a child, when we look in the eyes of the dogs and cats and horses that love us and get goosebumps. What happens when a band jams and everyone is throbbing and bobbing to the same feeling, and it goes on and on. And Ruth alludes to this and inspires me with it. It's the nature of reality and what's possible with our own thoughts, feelings, and intentions. Oh, look, there's another chat. Judith wrote, what is our grand story to reclaim the victory of the people, the flourishing of the common women and men, honoring the flora and fauna? Ruth, I'm going to claim that you have encapsulated a lot of what we've already heard. I'm watching the clock. We're coming down to diminishing times here. The great enemy of the truth. Kevin writes, the resurrection and ideals is a real good idea. And that other comment, Kevin is going to take us into an alley that I'm choosing to not insert this late time in our roundtable.
I can give
Liz, yes.
A quick answer to that, okay? You just heard us read about the Fitzgerald mythology and how the raising of the dead is part of it. So don't worry about it. These things are part of the mythology because it isn't just the body, obviously, it's the spirit. So I think that that's what you accept. If the body isn't there, the spirit is being raised.
Did I see it? Kris, you're going to get the last word. You always get the last word.
Onward.
Okay, good. We just heard the last word. That's
Right.
it, folks. I
Right.
want to thank you for coming. This is probably going to be instantly available as a playback on Facebook because it went out live, and now I think it's instant. And within a couple of days, there will be a YouTube video of this whole thing at the YouTube channel Valediction Vision. That's Valediction Vision. And please go to valediction.net. Within a couple of days, you'll see information about next month's roundtable. Go to TrineDay.com, get all the books, listen to all the podcasts, and I echo what my boss just said. Onward.
I
Amen.
have to say one
Here, here.
thing. I have to say one thing. It's so great to have all this mythology grounding this experience, and it's so rich. And so, thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth.
That was great.
Ruth has actually been to Abbeyfield too.
I have-